Thank you for watching. I'm Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news sources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Asian, African, and Australian channels, and also by news agencies AFP, AP, and Reuters. Now the headlines. Biden administration and Supreme Court abortion decision. U.S. troops leaving Chad and Niger of Africa. Ukrainian people living in America. People died due to rain in Kenya and in Brazil. World Food Program tells there is shortage of food in Gaza. Full-blown famine in some parts of Gaza. Israel killed 6 people in Gaza yesterday. Hamas delegation arrived in Egypt. Pro-Palestinian protests continue in college campuses. Russia attacked Ukraine. Flood in Houston, Texas. Now the news in detail.
On this Saturday night, new details on India's alleged hit on a Canadian Sikh separatist leader. Concerns of foreign government contract killings by gangsters in Canada.
The modus operandi of the Indian government under Modi has changed.
The alleged Indian intimidation and why Canada might not be alone. Harrowing rescue. Children carried out of a home in Gaza bombed by Israel as truce talks hinge on a Rafah ground invasion.
They have to decide, and they have to decide quickly.
Cities submerged, thousands displaced after record-breaking flooding in Brazil. High anxiety in Leaf Nation and risky business in the West as the Canucks and Oilers get set to face off the bold Alberta-BC playoff bet between premiers.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a global news investigation that's looking into the connection between the Indian government and a notorious Indian gang police believe is operating in Canada. Tonight we're learning more about the alleged contract killers behind the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Jeff Semple joins us now with what he's uncovered tonight. Jeff.
Farah, sources close to the investigation tell Global News that police believe India's Foreign Intelligence Agency was responsible for Hardeep Nijjar's murder, and sources say they hired contract killers to do their dirty work with connections to a notorious Indian gang.
Hardeep Nijjar was gunned down in the parking lot outside his Sikh temple, and police say these were the hitmen arrested in Edmonton yesterday. Indian nationals in their 20s, at least 2 of whom came to Canada on student visas. But sources say they weren't going to school.
The Rajasthan police arrested 3 members of the Lawrence Bishnoi gang.
Sources say the suspects are linked to India's notorious Bishnoi gang, accused in a litany of murders, drugs, and extortion cases. Its leader, Lawrence Bishnoi, has been locked in an Indian prison since 2014, but the 31-year-old still manages to give TV interviews and allegedly order assassinations.
According to the police sources, he has some 700 sharpshooters, under his command, and the man is sitting in jail. He can order killing of anybody.
How active is the Bishnoi group here in Canada?
Very active. There seems to be more gangsters now in Canada than in Punjab.
Lawrence Bishnoi had recently appeared in the Indian press declaring himself an Indian nationalist and condemning the Khalistan separatists, a reference to the campaign for an independent Sikh state in India's Punjab region, of which Nijjar was a prominent member.
This raises the question that there's a connection between the Indian government and these organized gangs in India.
Elsewhere, like the United States, following Nijjar's murder, the U.S. announced it had disrupted a similar plot to kill one of his associates. This man, Gurpatwan Panoon.
They have been hired and they have been instructed through the consulates.
In Panoon's case, U.S. officials claim an Indian intelligence officer hired an alleged drug trafficker for the murder, offering money and the dismissal of criminal charges.
They have arrested both these hit squad, basically for soldiers. They have to go to the root cause.
Canadian police said that they have arrested 3 Indian nationals.
Indian media reports claimed the arrests were further evidence that Nijjar was killed in a gang war, nothing to do with the Indian government.
India's foreign minister said his government is waiting for Canadian police to share information on the arrests, but he pointed to the alleged gang ties as another example of Canada's purported failure to crack down on criminals from Punjab. The suspects will appear in a Surrey courtroom on Monday. Farah?
Jeff Semple in Surrey, BC. Thanks, Jeff. And the U.S., as you heard in Jeff's report, isn't the only other country concerned about Indian intimidation and threats on home soil. Since Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stood up in the House of Commons this past fall accusing agents of the Indian state of orchestrating the murder of Hardeep Nijjar, several other countries have come forward. Our chief political correspondent David Aiken has more on India's growing assertiveness under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
It has happened in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, and here in Canada. Security agencies tracking a global campaign believed to be orchestrated by the government of India against Sikh separatism, against attempts to create a separate Khalistani state based in the northwestern Indian province of the Punjab.
I think it is an ongoing thing. The modus operandi of the Indian government under Modi has changed.
Former BC Premier and former federal cabinet minister Uttal Desange is speaking about Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, currently campaigning for re-election. Modi's political career has been built on a militant Hindu nationalism, which has often expressed itself by threatening minority Muslim and Sikh populations.
I'm a human rights activist too, in my old garb. Before I actually came into electoral politics. So I despise that kind of an approach to international politics.
India's foreign ministry says it does not interfere in other countries' politics, but the ongoing public inquiry into foreign interference has evidence from Canada's security agencies that it does. And the inquiry heard from witnesses about Indian interference in Canada.
Indian consulates act as a hub for espionage and foreign interference and transnational repression targeting the Sikh community. and they'll target anyone who's vocal.
And while the inquiry's focus is only on election interference, the Trudeau government says it is looking at measures to address pervasive interference by India and other countries such as China, Iran, and Russia.
It is a challenge. It's an evolving threat. It's pervasive. It targets diaspora communities in Canada, but we're going to continue to do everything we can do to detect and disrupt this foreign interference.
And in fact, the government will table new legislation Monday aimed at countering foreign interference. David Aiken, Global News, Ottawa.
As we've been reporting, the 3 men arrested in the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar were all Indian nationals who came to Canada on visas. This week on the West Block, our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson sits down with the minister responsible for the RCMP. She asks... So we've been reporting the 3 men arrested in the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar were all Indian nationals who came to Canada on visas. This week on the West Block, our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson sits down with the minister responsible for the RCMP. She asks Dominic LeBlanc if Canadian security services are properly vetting visa applicants. Here's a preview of that conversation.
I imagine your government must know, though, how they came to Canada.
Again, this may be an interesting part of a future criminal trial, but I would not want to do or say anything that would prejudice the ability of prosecutors to successfully conduct this case.
Does it raise concerns for you about whether there is enough due diligence being done on people who are coming to Canada on foreign student visas?
Again, the Immigration Department can speak to how the visas are issued. I know that the Immigration Department works with security and intelligence agencies in these cases, and has for a long time in the thousands and thousands of these files that are reviewed. That's an ongoing process, and obviously I have confidence in the Security and Intelligence Service that would work with the Immigration Department.
And you can watch the full interview with Minister LeBlanc tomorrow morning on the West Block, right here on Global. In the Middle East tonight, there are reports that efforts have intensified to secure a deal for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of Israeli hostages. Hamas delegations in Cairo for talks led by mediators from the United States and Qatar, who have reported signs of compromise in recent days. But key questions remain, including how a planned operation in the southern Gaza city of Rafah might factor into all of this. Reggie Cicchini reports.
Arms extended, these men prepare for a delicate handoff as rescuers pass a child to them. The Palestinian Civil Defense says this residence was hit during an Israeli airstrike early Saturday. These children survived, but according to UNICEF, by March, some 13,000 had not. The scenes have led to eruptions of emotion around the world and growing calls for a ceasefire.
Both sides are under some pressure now to do a deal.
In Egypt, mediators are facilitating indirect talks between the two sides. The U.S. has urged Hamas to accept what's been presented.
They have to decide. And they have to decide quickly.
The full details of the proposal aren't known, and while Hamas has reportedly called it an improvement, it's still seeking a permanent ceasefire and a full troop withdrawal, which appears to be a non-starter with Israel.
I think what Netanyahu is thinking is, we're losing the story war, let's win the ground war. Once we have some kind of victory, people will understand our thinking.
In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu earlier this week insisted an operation in Rafah is essential. Israeli tanks have been parked at its southern border with Gaza for weeks. Moving in may result in Hamas walking away from the table, seeing its demands pushed aside. It may also force the U.S. to rethink its policies if civilians become collateral damage.
Secretary Blinken has famously said superpowers don't bluff, saying, the era of unconditional love and guns is over, and if you want our support, you need to listen to our ground rules.
A short-lived pause in fighting last November is the only real progress both sides have made. Since then, famine has deepened and disease has spread. The UN fears a Rafah incursion will only add to a complex humanitarian crisis.
A new wave of displacement, more overcrowding, less access to essential food, water, or sanitation.
Awaiting word of progress in the talks, the stability of an entire region hangs in the balance. Reggie Cicchini, Global News, Washington.
Now, getting out of Gaza is not only limited and dangerous and unpredictable, but it can be extremely expensive. And those who can't escape, they remain in constant peril. According to the federal government, 179 people have been approved to come to Canada. Some have already arrived after crossing into Egypt from Rafah. Lawyers working with Palestinians trying to escape say some have resorted to paying bribes or large fees worth thousands of dollars to private companies. That's just across the border. They're among the 986 Palestinians who applied to come to Canada since mid-April under Ottawa's special temporary resident visa program announced in January to help resettle Palestinians who have relatives already in Canada. In Brazil's south, the military has been deployed in a state of public calamities in effect to deal with a deadly flood emergency, which tonight is only getting worse. After days of torrential rain, floodwater is as high as rooftops. The scale of this disaster is unlike anything anyone in the country's southernmost state has ever seen. Everything is lost. There's nothing left, she says. The record-breaking floods have devastated 2/3 of the 497 cities in Rio Grande do Sul, forcing nearly 25,000 people to flee their homes since the storms began a week ago. The state's governor says it's the biggest disaster ever. At least 57 people are known to have died, and more than 60 others are still missing. 10,000 people have lost their homes after rivers burst their banks. A hydroelectric dam collapsed, sending a torrent of water into neighborhoods. According to the Brazilian Geological Service, water levels have reached their highest in nearly 150 years. Deadly rains recently swamped the state in September. And this researcher says there's no escape, that in the coming years, weather events like this will become even more extreme and frequent due to the climate crisis. A climate plan in doubt. Coming up, how shattered projects in Alberta have dealt a major blow to Canada's green agenda. One of Alberta's largest power generators has scrapped a proposed wind farm project and put 3 other developments on hold due to new provincial rules around renewable power. TransAlta says it will not be moving forward with a 47-turbine wind farm in southwestern Alberta near the Rocky Mountain foothills. The utility says rules that introduced a 35-kilometer buffer zone around the deemed pristine viewscapes, along with a lack of certainty into the market, led to the decision to scrap the 300-megawatt wind farm. That marks the second setback this week for Alberta's energy transition. On Wednesday, electricity generator Capital Power announced it was cancelling a $2.4 billion carbon capture and storage project for its natural gas facility near Edmonton. Heather Yorks West looks at what happened and why the decision has cast new doubt over a key tenet of Canada's climate plan.
What was supposed to be one of Canada's largest carbon capture projects has now been shelved.
This would have been, I believe, the first of its kind carbon capture and storage on a natural gas plant. And so, there's certainly a lot of additional risk and economic concerns that goes along with that.
Edmonton-based Capital Power says continuing with the $2.4 billion proposal didn't make economic sense.
The decision by Capital Power to abandon its carbon capture plans, it really just is the latest failure of a technology with a track record of failures.
Environmental Defence says the move should come as a wake-up call before public dollars are lost. Ottawa has already committed to help build new carbon capture projects, covering up to 50% of capital costs through an investment tax credit. But to cover their costs, industry needs a way to make money on the carbon that's been trapped. The federal government has already set a pollution price. If the Liberals remain in power, by 2030 it will be $170 per ton. Emitters can either pay that price, decarbonize, or buy credits from companies that have decarbonized using things like carbon capture and storage. But what's missing from the formula is how much those credits can be sold for, especially if there's a change in government and the price on carbon falls.
The Government of Canada has announced that they have a program that will purchase credits and guarantee a minimum price of those credits to facilities like Capital Power.
The Canada Growth Fund, a newly created federal agency called the Canada Growth Fund, has signed 3 deals with other companies, including a smaller proposed project by Calgary-based Entropy, guaranteeing an assured price on its captured pollution. But the piecemeal negotiations with Capital Power couldn't reach the same conclusion, dealing a major blow to the government's green agenda. Heather Yorks West, Global News, Calgary.
WestJet passengers are being warned of possible disruptions ahead after the airline issued a lockout notice to workers who maintain its aircraft. The Calgary-based airline has been in negotiations with the union representing its aircraft maintenance engineers since September. Now, members of that union began a week-long strike vote on Thursday, but today, WestJet issued those workers a 72-hour lockout notice. And if a deal isn't reached in that time, the carrier says work stoppages could start as early as noon Mountain Time on Tuesday. WestJet says this doesn't guarantee travel disruptions, but they are preparing to operate a reduced schedule. London Drugs is gradually reopening its core services at stores across Western Canada. The company was hit by a security attack last weekend, and all its stores in Western Canada have been closed since then. The company is restarting its core services first, such as its healthcare and everyday needs. It also says at this point in the investigation, there is no evidence that any customer databases have been compromised. Caregiving crisis ahead. The new data shedding light on the hidden toll of unpaid care.
Yango, different.
May is National Caregiving Month in Canada, and a new report released this week is sounding the alarm over the status of millions of Canadians who provide unpaid care for our elderly and our young children. As Anne Gaviola tells us, the report sheds light on the hidden toll of free labor in this country.
The demands are tremendous.
You may have heard of the so-called sandwich generation, adults who are caring for both elderly parents and their own children. Marcy Gray is one of them. The mother of 3 teens cares for her kids, her aging parents and in-laws, and her grandmother, all while running a busy psychotherapy business.
Unpaid work does not end. You don't get that salary at the end of the day.
For the first time, Statistics Canada is sharing data zeroing in on these sandwiched caregivers and the breadth of the informal care economy, their free labor that goes largely unrecognized. In 2022, 13.4 million Canadians aged 15 and up provided unpaid care. 13% of them are under the sandwich generation umbrella, caring for both children and the elderly.
Sandwich caregiving is most common for people between the ages of 35 and 44 years old, followed by those between 45 and 54. And all that extra work takes a toll.
86% of sandwich caregivers reported at least one negative impact on their physical health and well-being, including feeling tired or anxious and overwhelmed because of their responsibilities.
You're going to see substantial increases in care required for elderly people.
This economics professor tells Global News that with the leading edge of baby boomers entering their 70s, we're nearing peak demand for paid and informal care for seniors, and we're not prepared. Statistics show the burden of unpaid care is disproportionately shouldered by women.
You also see that the intensity of work for women is typically higher than the intensity for men.
I've already done the crash and burn in my own life. I've already done that where I've hit the wall and couldn't go further.
Her advice?
You've got to build in your own breaks. You've got to build in your own opportunities for delegating. You've got to build that into your life in order to do well and continue to thrive and survive.
Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Next, it's not just about playoff hockey, the battle of provincial pride between Alberta and BC. There's a bold bet going around in hockey fandom circles at the highest level. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith taunting her BC counterpart into a bet, and David Eby has accepted. The loser of the Canucks-Oilers matchup will have to deliver a statement written by the winner in the legislature wearing the other team's jersey. Meanwhile, scenes of joy and jubilation inside and outside Vancouver's Rogers Arena last night. Fandemonium after the Canucks eliminated the Predators in a tense Game 6 during the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. The Canucks scored the series-clinching goal with under 2 minutes to go in regulation and will now meet the Edmonton Oilers in an all-Canadian second-round matchup. A Canadian team has not won the Stanley Cup in 31 years, but with two of our own advancing, there's still a chance to bring the cup home. And tonight, there could be a third, with Toronto taking on Boston in a do-or-die Game 7. The Maple Leafs, of course, have a lot to prove to fans after a tough start to the series, but everyone's hoping they can keep the momentum alive after forcing the series decider with two gutsy back-to-back victories. And that's Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew here, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is this wagon of flowers in Kelowna, British Columbia. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Tonight, several developing stories as we come on the air. Millions under flood watches with more torrential rain on the way. And college graduations disrupted by protests as negotiators press for a ceasefire deal in Gaza. First, the flood emergency. 21 million people in the south under watches. Days of relentless rain, leading to hundreds of high water rescues in southeast Texas. The growing concern as a major river rises. Another 5 inches of rain in the forecast on top of the 15 inches that already fell this week. The threat expanding to other states in the coming days. Samara Theodore in the flood zone in Texas. Campus unrest. Pro-Palestinian demonstrations disrupting college graduations. The commencement interrupted at the University of Michigan. Protesters clash with police at the University of Virginia. And tonight, the Education Secretary expressing concern about a rise in anti-Semitism on campuses. Also tonight, the Gaza negotiations intensify. The CIA director arriving in Cairo to press for a temporary ceasefire, but are Israel and Hamas willing to cut a deal? We speak with the family of an American hostage worried about what might happen if Israel goes ahead with a ground invasion of Rafah. Tom Sufi Burridge with late details from Israel. The high-stakes fundraiser in Palm Beach. Top Republican donors and vice presidential hopefuls gather with former President Trump. The election now 6 months away. Felony charges. 2 teenagers accused of dumping trash into the ocean off of Florida now facing the possibility of years in prison or hefty fines. The family of one of them now speaking out. The dramatic rescue captured on a police officer's body camera. The officer and a neighbor rescuing people from a building engulfed in flames. The major food recall. 8 tons of ground beef products sold at Walmart taken off store shelves because of possible contamination. Is it the future of warfare? An American F-16 takes to the sky, controlled not by a pilot, but by artificial intelligence. And the duet, 60 years in the making. Time was definitely on their side.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us on this Saturday. I'm Wade Johnson. As we come on the air tonight, more than 21 million Americans are under flood watches, with severe weather bearing down on parts of Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. The already saturated region could see up to 5 more inches of rain. More than a foot of rain has already fallen in some places over the past few days. Officials warning of dangerous conditions in low-lying areas. First responders seen here performing dozens of water rescues, some homes fully submerged. Multiple tornadoes popping up in the region. These images from outside Silver, Texas on Friday. Several rivers near Houston tonight at major flood stage and expected to crest this weekend. ABC meteorologist Samara Theodore leading us off in southeast Texas.
After days of relentless rain causing widespread flooding, evacuations, and damage to buildings, tonight, officials in East Texas are warning the situation in the region could get worse.
I want to be very clear that we're not out of the woods yet.
The warning comes as water levels in some Houston area rivers hit their highest level since Hurricane Harvey in 2017. The Trinity and San Jacinto rivers both in major flood stages, with another round of heavy rain expected tomorrow.
There's still major flooding. We don't feel comfortable lifting the evacuation orders.
Officials warning of a potentially catastrophic water surge in low-lying areas. First responders already conducting water rescues for more than 400 people. Some homes almost entirely underwater.
It's probably 12, 15 feet deep.
Waylon Hicks was forced to evacuate his home in Cold Spring, Texas, north of Houston, returning to the house today by boat after helping families evacuate the flooded neighborhood.
How many families do you think were displaced by this?
We, just in here alone, we helped 3 or 4 families get out, and their pets and things.
So let's get right to Samara Theodore in the flood zone. And Samara, the worst is not over yet.
That's correct, Whit. Here in Conroe, Texas, the San Jacinto River has completely commandeered McDade Park, and unfortunately, more rain is on the way. The alerts are expansive. Flood watches stretching from Houston, Texas, all the way up to Tulsa. Meanwhile, in the western part of the state, we are tracking the threat for severe weather through tonight. Some of those storms leading to tornadoes. Now, if you look at how much rain we can see anywhere from 4 inches or more locally in some areas, including San Antonio, Texas, Huntsville, previously hit hard. And then tomorrow, things are pretty quiet on the severe weather front, but they pick back up again on Monday. This time for the central portion of the country. Much of the heartland could see very high risk for tornadoes stretching from Nebraska all the way down to Oklahoma and parts of northern Texas, and that impacts folks on their Monday evening commute.
We see that flooding behind you and more to come. All right, Samara, thank you. Now to the growing unrest on college campuses and the threat of protests looming over graduation season. Just before we came on the air, police in riot gear seen moving into the University of Virginia's campus in Charlottesville, and demonstrations today at the University of Michigan. All of this raising questions about the impact on commencement ceremonies across the country. ABC's Phil Lipoff from NYU here in New York.
Tonight, colleges boiling over, clashes between protesters and police at the University of Virginia. Graduation season now in full swing. Some celebrations marred by protests, fueled by the war in Gaza. At the University of Michigan, protests on the field and in the air. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators waving flags and chanting. Even booing during the president's speech. From above, supporters of Israel flying a plane carrying a sign that reads, "We stand with Israel." At least 2,300 protesters have been arrested on 46 campuses across the country in the last 3 weeks of uproar. Protests growing into encampments, administrators struggling with how to respond to the demands of protesters, for schools to cut ties with Israel altogether, divest from companies they say profit from the war, and publicly call for a ceasefire, while pro-Israeli supporters call for the release of the 100-plus remaining hostages kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona writing in a letter to colleges that he is particularly disturbed by the sharp rise in anti-Semitism, calling the incidents abhorrent, many Jewish students feeling threatened.
Jewish community here, we felt like a lot of our concerns have just fallen on deaf ears.
In Florida, the chancellor of the state university system sending a letter to all state schools saying in part, while we respect and honor the First Amendment, a commencement ceremony is not the time nor the place for a political protest. He went on to say, take any steps necessary to keep people safe. Security has been an issue at UCLA. Violent confrontations between pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli groups. And at Columbia, the NYPD using a Bearcat ladder truck to take back control of a campus building seized by pro-Palestinian protesters.
Phil Lipoff back with us now from outside NYU, where there have been recent protests. And Phil, what more are you learning about the possible impact on graduations?
Well, we're here in New York. NYU and Columbia both have graduations on May 15th. That's still 2 weeks away, so it's a little too early to tell if these early interruptions will affect these later graduations. But we do know school leaders at Northwestern, Rutgers, and Brown all made deals with protesters to fend off any potential disruptions in final exams or at graduation.
All right, Phil, thank you. And tune into This Week tomorrow morning. Jonathan Karl speaks with New York City Mayor Eric Adams about the state of anti-war protests at college campuses. And overseas, talks in Cairo are intensifying as negotiators try to push a ceasefire agreement over the finish line between Israel and Hamas. Overnight, at least 3 people were killed in strikes on the southern edge of the Gaza Strip. Israel saying today, deal or no deal, it still plans to send the IDF into Rafah. ABC's Tom Sufi-Burridge from Israel tonight.
Tonight, with Gaza ceasefire talks intensifying in Cairo, Israel indicating it will not accept any hostage deal which would end the war. Hamas studying a proposal which would see an initial 6-week pause in the fighting. In a statement, Hamas saying it is considering the Israeli proposal in a, quote, positive spirit, but adding the group is pushing for a definitive end to the war. People rallying tonight in Tel Aviv, calling for a ceasefire.
Well, there's frustration, there's anger on the streets of Tel Aviv. This is the movement pressuring the Israeli government to get a deal to get the hostages home. But a deal also depends on Hamas.
CIA Director Bill Burns in the Egyptian capital, with the Israeli government reiterating it will launch an invasion into Rafah in southern Gaza, where more than 1 million Palestinians are sheltering, with or without a deal. In the meantime, strikes continuing in Rafah, first responders rescuing 2 children from the rubble. 35-year-old Sagi Dechochen, one of 5 Americans thought to be still held by Hamas. His father Jonathan telling us if there isn't a deal now, he believes invading Rafah may be necessary to free the hostages.
If Hamas cannot get to yes right now, I am quite certain, and I fear that very different steps are going to have to be taken in order to get our hostages home. That will bring more misery in the short term.
And with Israel hitting back at the Biden administration's opposition to an invasion of Rafah, a senior Israeli official telling me Israel will make its own decision.
Tom Sufi-Burridge for us tonight. Thank you. Turning now to the race for the White House, some of the biggest names in the Republican Party descending on Palm Beach this weekend in support of former President Donald Trump. The guest list includes major donors and several top contenders to be Trump's vice presidential pick. Here's ABC's White House correspondent, Karen Travers.
Tonight, former President Donald Trump out of the courtroom.
So I'm not allowed to comment on any of that, as you know, I'm under a gag order.
And back on his home turf, hosting a multi-day retreat with Republicans in Palm Beach, Florida. The event featuring donors, party leaders, and close allies of the former president, who could be his running mate. A vice presidential audition in front of wealthy donors.
Donald Trump is using this as kind of a mini reality show to showcase some of the rising stars of the party, one of which just might be his running mate this fall.
Potential VP hopefuls in Palm Beach include Senator Tim Scott, Senator Marco Rubio, Governor Kristi Noem, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Governor Doug Burgum, and Senator J.D. Vance. But sources say the former president is not very far along in the sweepstakes process. His campaign not yet starting to formally vet candidates and go through their personal information, and Trump not yet engaging. The retreat bringing together more than 400 donors, tickets priced from $5,000 to $25,000. With 6 months until Election Day, Trump needs a fundraising boost. The former president and Republicans starting April with less than half the cash on hand of the Biden campaign and Democrats. And polls continue to show a tight race. A new Reuters Ipsos poll found President Biden and Trump even among registered voters.
Sources tell ABC the Trump campaign officials today told donors and guests they want to try to compete in Virginia and Minnesota, 2 states that President Biden won in 2020. The Biden campaign tells me that Team Trump cannot back that rhetoric up with operations and staff in battleground states. With
Karen Travers, thanks so much. We appreciate it. We have new information about the deadly police shooting this week outside of a Wisconsin middle school. A 14-year-old shot by officers after a report of a person with what appeared to be a long gun near the school. ABC's M. Nguyen joins us now. And M, you're learning new details about the weapon involved.
That's right, Whit. Tonight, authorities say the student who was shot and killed by officers outside a southern Wisconsin middle school was carrying a pellet gun. Police were originally called to the scene on Monday about a suspect with a backpack and what appeared to be a long gun moving toward Mount Horeb Middle School. The Wisconsin Department of Justice leading the investigation now saying officers encountered the subject, which ABC News has learned was a 14-year-old boy just east of the school's main entrance. Officers say they then directed the teen to drop the weapon, but that he did not comply. That's when authorities say the boy pointed the weapon, now identified as a pellet rifle, at officers, prompting them to fire. Officials say the boy died on the scene. No officers nor others were injured. The law enforcement involved are now on administrative leave as per policy. They were also wearing body cameras during the time of the incident.
All right, Em, thank you. Tonight, an update on another story we've been following here. 2 teens are facing felony charges after allegedly dumping trash into the ocean off the Florida coast. The incident caught on camera here. The teens could face a $50,000 fine or possible jail time. Both have turned themselves in amid public outrage. Here's ABC's Ika Joshi.
Tonight, 2 Florida teens who turned themselves into police are cooperating with investigators after viral video showing them dumping trash into the Atlantic Ocean generated outrage around the world.
I'm working calls from all over the world on this issue. This is just such an egregious act that has offended so many people.
According to charging documents, the teens are facing felony pollution charges punishable with up to $50,000 in fines or up to 5 years in prison.
It's a callous, disregard for our environment, and that, this won't be tolerated in Florida.
Officials say a group of minors left a party called Boca Bash off the coast of Boca Raton. Video captured by a local content creator and later posted on YouTube showing 2 teens dumping garbage cans full of trash, apparently celebrating before heading back to the party. Investigators calling it both a serious crime and a teachable moment.
These are juveniles. We're not here to ruin someone's life forever.
One of the teens on board who wasn't charged speaking with our affiliate WPLG, saying those actions should have consequences.
I do feel a little remorse for him, but I also feel like he deserves whatever happened because he made a really bad decision.
With the teens were released back to their parents, with one of the parents issuing an apology on their behalf and lobbying for the teens to be given community service.
Ike Kajachi for us tonight, thank you. A milestone tonight in Lewiston, Maine, the bowling alley, one of 2 locations targeted in the mass shooting that claimed the lives of 18 people back in October, reopened to the public. A large crowd gathering, avid bowlers greeting friends, happy to be back and to honor the victims. Inside a display, 18 bowling pins bearing the names of each one of those killed. There's still much more ahead on World News Tonight this Saturday. Actor Kevin Spacey responds to new allegations of sexual misconduct and a dramatic rescue captured on body camera video, an officer pulling people from a burning home. Next tonight, actor Kevin Spacey is denying new allegations of sexual misconduct contained in a British documentary to be released next week. Spacey was acquitted of sexual offense charges last year in the UK. In the documentary, 10 men accuse Spacey of misconduct, some of the allegations going back decades. Spacey maintains he's never done anything illegal. There's an urgent search underway in New Mexico for a baby believed to have been kidnapped after her mother was murdered. Elia Maria Torres is just 10 months old. Police were called to a park near Clovis on Friday. 2 women were found shot to death, including the mother of the missing baby. The baby's older sister was found injured at the scene and is being treated at a hospital. When we come back, a burning home and the heroic effort to rescue a man in a wheelchair. To the index now, at a major food recall, the Department of Agriculture recalling 8 tons of raw ground beef sold at Walmart. The meat may be contaminated with E. coli bacteria. The beef was produced late last month by Cargill Meat Solutions. It was sold in 11 states and Washington, D.C. We have a list of all the recalled meat products on our website. We're getting a glimpse into the future of warfare. Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall recently got to ride in an F-16 controlled by artificial intelligence, not a human pilot. Kendall was aboard for a series of maneuvers at more than 550 miles per hour. The military hopes to deploy the first AI-enabled warplanes by 2028. And we have a new video of a dramatic rescue in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Officer Danielle Moore's body camera captured her running toward a house engulfed in flames on Thursday. A neighbor had already pulled one person from the fire. That woman and Moore were then joined by other officers who helped the man out of the garage into a wheelchair and got him to safety. When we come back, the Rolling Stones collaboration, 60 years in the making. Finally tonight, something special for music fans with time on their side. A musical event 60 years in the making. The Rolling Stones at their first New Orleans Jazz Fest, inviting singer Irma Thomas on stage for Time Is On My Side. That iconic tune sung here by Mick Jagger on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964. Helping to catapult the Stones to superstardom. But what many don't know, it was the young New Orleans soul singer Thomas who recorded it first. She recounted how they came to see her perform in this 2019 Dutch documentary.
They expressed the fact that they loved Time Is On My Side and that they were going to do it. It immediately shot to the top of the charts, and of course, mine was just a memory.
Thomas, known as the Soul Queen in New Orleans, continued her successful music career, winning a Grammy in 2007. But for many decades, she stopped singing Time Is On My Side.
And we've asked her to join us to sing the song she recorded before the Rolling Stones did it, I might add.
Until finally reviving it at the request of Bonnie Raitt for a New Year's Eve performance. And then, last Thursday, Mick Jagger and Irma Thomas, now 83, this special duet, a rare treat for music fans. What a moment. I'm Whit Johnson in New York. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Moore, America's most watched newscast.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, what the Biden administration's expansion of healthcare privacy means for people seeking abortions. Then concerns about security and stability in Africa as American troops leave Chad and Niger. And one Ukrainian family lost everything in the Russian invasion. Now they're rebuilding their life in America.
I will always feel this pain for him because I had normal life and now he has like different life.
Thank you. Good evening, I'm John Yang. Almost from the very beginning of the Israel-Hamas war, 7 months ago next week, aid groups have been warning that Gaza was a humanitarian crisis in the making. And now Cindy McCain, head of the UN's World Food Program, tells NBC's Meet the Press the situation has reached a perilous phase.
What I can explain to you is that there's famine, full-blown famine in the north, and it's moving its way south.
I just want to be very clear because what you're saying is significant, and I believe it's the first time we've heard it. You're saying there is full-blown famine in northern Gaza.
I am. Yes, I am. And there has not been an official declaration that there's no, but you are saying that based on what you've seen? Yes, it is. Based on what we've seen and what we've experienced on the ground, yes. Which is, it's horror. It's, you know, it's so hard to look at and it's so hard to hear also.
In southern Gaza today, an Israeli airstrike sent plumes of smoke into the skies. Reports said 6 people were killed in 2 different locations. As all this was going on, efforts to negotiate a deal between Israel and Hamas for a hostage release and a truce were said to be intensifying. A Hamas delegation arrived in Cairo today, but Israel has not yet sent a team of negotiators. As the college commencement season gets into full swing, tensions on campuses remain high due to anti-war protests. At the University of Virginia this afternoon, police arrested several protesters at a pro-Palestinian encampment on campus, saying it was an unlawful assembly. And at the University of Michigan, there was a brief disturbance when protesters waved Palestinian flags and chanted anti-war messages. About 50 people took part. Today also marked the 54th anniversary of the death of 4 students at Kent State University in Ohio during a Vietnam War protest. Last night, there was a candlelight vigil commemorating the day Ohio National Guard troops opened fire on protesters. In Ukraine, new drone footage reveals the damage Russia has inflicted on a village in the eastern Donetsk region. No building appears untouched, many looking damaged beyond repair. Residents have fled, and Ukraine's military acknowledges that Russia has gained a foothold as troops advance against Ukraine's depleted defenses. In Kyiv to the north, Russia stepped up attacks overnight. Exploding drones set fire to 2 buildings in an industrial area. Russia has increasingly targeted Ukraine's second-largest city, which is only 25 miles from the Russian border. And around Houston, more than 400 people have been rescued from their homes after fierce storms left neighborhoods flooded, and officials say more rain forecast for tonight could make the situation even worse. In a 24-hour period, more than 11 inches of rain fell, inundating roads and homes and forcing a number of high-water rescues. Authorities urged residents of low-lying areas to evacuate ahead of tonight's rains. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, the potential consequences of American troops pulling out of 2 African nations. And after fleeing the war, a Ukrainian family begins to rebuild in America.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
Late last month, the Biden administration issued new rules designed to keep prosecutors from getting the medical records of patients seeking legal abortions. The expansion of the 30-year-old health privacy law known as HIPAA prohibits the disclosure of health information to state officials who are conducting a criminal investigation. The idea is to prevent it from being used to prosecute an instance where a pregnant person goes out of state for a legal abortion. The rules are to take effect in late June. Carmel Shakar heads the Health, Law, and Policy Clinic at Harvard University. Carmel, I think there are a lot of people who have misperceptions about HIPAA. They think that their medical information goes locked into a vault almost, behind an impenetrable wall. So why are these new rules needed?
So I wish that HIPAA was that kind of lockbox. The truth is that HIPAA is a little bit more like a pasta strainer. So it keeps some information protected, but there's a lot of exceptions. And one of the exceptions that has been there from the start is if law enforcement goes to your medical provider and says, hey, we need these patients' medical records for an investigation. And ever since Dobbs undid the constitutional protections for abortion, people are afraid that police, law enforcement in states that have banned abortion will use that exception to get patients' medical records.
Do cities and states collect information about people who have abortion procedures that is not protected?
Yes, a lot of states have had abortion and abortion complication reporting requirements for many years. Those reports nominally don't include people's names. It's supposed to be okay. Who's providing abortions, what are the outcomes of the abortion? Travel would be restricted depending on their pregnancy status.
Carmel Shakar from Harvard University, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The African nations of Niger and Chad have both been key partners with the United States in combating terrorist groups in the region. But as Ali Rogan tells us, that cooperation is in question now that both countries are ruled by military regimes.
The American presence in Niger and Chad gave U.S. troops eyes in the sky and boots at Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Ali.
Since Russia invaded Ukraine more than 2 years ago, about 6.5 million Ukrainians have left the country, including hundreds of thousands who've come to the United States. One of them is 10-year-old Artem Fedorenko. Just days after the war began, he lost part of his arm in a Russian bombing that killed his father and brother. A Minnesota group that helps Ukrainians who've lost limbs brought Artem to America for a prosthetic arm, and today he and his mother Oksana are rebuilding their lives in suburban Minneapolis. This story comes to us from Minnesota Public Radio News. Now online, cicada season is in full swing. As the soil in several states reaches 64 degrees Fahrenheit, billions of cicadas will emerge to start off their adult life in the world above ground. All that and more is on our website, pbs.org/newshour. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Saturday. On Sunday, how some students and administrators are diffusing tensions over pro-Palestinian protests on campuses. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Tonight, dangerous storm strike deep in the heart of Texas. Terrifying scenes in the Lone Star State, the damage already catastrophic. Rivers rising to record levels, and it could get worse in the hours ahead.
We go right here?
We'll have the latest.
Catastrophic flooding and high water rescues. I'm Janet Shamlian in Texas. We're along for the ride.
Also tonight, Gaza ceasefire and hostage talks intensify in Egypt.
I'm Rami Inocencio in Tel Aviv in one of the biggest anti-government pro-ceasefire rallies since October 7th. Israel says it will not send a delegation to Cairo for talks with Hamas until the militant group responds to its proposal.
Plus, as college graduations begin, some are met with protests. Trouble today at the University of Virginia. And disruptions in Michigan. 2 Florida teens turned themselves in after being caught on camera dumping garbage into the ocean. And later, she was the majesty of the seas. The Queen Mary, her reign ending in California, why it's once again full steam ahead.
There's a soul here that other ships don't have, that the Queen Mary has.
This is the CBS Weekend News from Washington with Adriana Diaz.
Good evening, I'm Ed O'Keefe, and tonight for Adriana, we begin in Texas, where there's a brief break in the rain, but a flood watch in effect through Sunday afternoon across the 3rd most populated part of the country. Some areas of Texas have already seen 12 inches fall in recent days, triggering mandatory evacuations. The governor has issued disaster declarations for almost 90 of the state's 254 counties. Several storms could produce large hail and spawn strong tornadoes. Houston especially has been swamped, and that's where we find CBS's Janet Shamlian deep in the flood zone in the Channel View community. Janet, good evening.
Good evening to you. We were with first responders today as they put themselves at risk amid an unfolding emergency, with floodwaters here still rising.
Relentless floodwaters rising in southeast Texas, even amid a break in the rain. But no rest for first responders.
This neighborhood has not seen the worst of it yet?
No, that's the sad part.
We joined Harris County Sheriff's deputies on an airboat, making rescues around the clock.
This is the worst I've seen, second only to Hurricane Harvey.
Lieutenant David Jasper says this neighborhood has been under a mandatory evacuation order for days, and yet we met people refusing to leave.
They could take you to a shelter.
No, ma'am, I have a truck over the side of the street. This family decided time had run out to stay in their flooded home, deputies ferrying them to drier ground. The sheriff of the nation's 3rd largest county, Ed Gonzalez, told me the danger still exists.
It's a beautiful day, it's a sunny day, but yet the water can be very treacherous. More water is on its way as well with more rain.
But tonight, encouraging news about the Texas family seen in this now viral video.
Get in the car! Get in the car!
Please, God, help! Rescued by a storm chaser after a tornado leveled their home. They're recovering. Casey Lambert credited the power of prayer.
And I tried to just embrace my family. And my thoughts were, well, at least we're together. And Daddy says I kept praying through the whole thing.
And back here in the flood zone, this is the launch area, one of the launch areas for the boats that they put in the water to make those rescues. It's work that's going to continue into this evening, but of course gets much more dangerous after dark. Ed?
Janet Shamlian, thanks to you and your team. And there is severe weather tonight in other parts of the country beyond Texas. Let's bring in meteorologist Paul Goodloe from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Well, Ed, the month of May is typically the rainiest month for most cities across the state of Texas, but I tell you what, some cities have picked up perhaps 2 or 3 times that amount of rain just in the first couple of days of May, so that is leading to a lot of flooding. Every single triangle is a river here in southeastern Texas in minor, moderate, or major flooding, and there's more rain to come. Storms developing this evening, keep pushing overnight. I'm definitely concerned about the Houston area for more rain coming throughout the day on Sunday. But wait, there's more. Winter storm warning out towards the west. The Sierra snow levels are at 5,000 feet. Yes, some snow there, but that same system pushes eastward, and yes, May is also the most active month for severe weather, including tornadoes. We're going to have the triggering mechanisms for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for more severe weather. We come across some of the same areas have been devastated the last week or two by tornadoes. Yes, Monday a threat, Tuesday a threat, Wednesday a threat, from the plains, Texas, into the Midwest and Ohio Valley. So definitely be weather aware this coming week. Ed?
Paul Goodloe of the Weather Channel, thank you. Now overseas, we've heard this several times before in recent months, but tonight there is fresh hope for at least a temporary peace in the Middle East. That's because CIA Director Bill Burns is in Cairo, where mediators are trying to reach a new hostage and ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. CBS's Rainio Inocencio in Tel Aviv has the latest.
Ed, good evening. An advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told our CBS News team the end of the war will come with the end of Hamas in Gaza, and that Israel is united in the need to achieve all of its war objectives. But as we saw tonight, this country is far from united.
The fear from some families of those still held hostage by Hamas is that the destruction of the militant group could mean the death of their loved ones. Tonight, supporters of those captured rallied for their peaceful release and against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's vow to invade Rafah.
This is one of the biggest anti-government pro-ceasefire rallies since October 7th. Israel says it will not send a delegation to Cairo for talks with Hamas until the militant group responds to its proposal.
The ceasefire that may suspend this bloody war, now nearly 7 months on, hinges on a swap for hostages. The pause would reportedly be weeks long. For every one hostage Hamas releases, Israel would release a larger number of Palestinians held in Israeli jails. Aviva Siegel wants that ceasefire to happen. Her American husband Keith is in Hamas's hands.
He's been there too long, lying on a mattress on the floor, being starved.
Siegel knows what her husband is going through. She too was held hostage by Hamas, but released after 51 days.
I said, I'm going to Keith to say goodbye. And I gave him a hug and I said, please be strong for me and I'll be strong for you.
And the White House late Friday again stressed it cannot support Netanyahu's threat to attack Rafah.
We haven't seen a comprehensive plan.
Without Israel having a plan to protect civilians. More than 34,000 people have been killed in Gaza so far, says its health ministry run by Hamas. And more people still die each day, if not from Israeli strikes like this family today in Rafah, then by conditions turning more dire each day, while life implodes in Rafah and across the entire Gaza Strip.
And ceasefire negotiations for today have ended and with no developments. That's according to a senior Hamas source close to the talks in Cairo. But Ed, that source added, tomorrow, a new round will begin.
Let's hope so. Rainy Inocencio in Tel Aviv tonight. Thank you. As for how the Biden administration is tracking these talks, let's turn now to Natalie Brand, the White House. Natalie, good evening.
Good evening, Ed. The Biden administration has been focused intensely all week on pushing for this ceasefire hostage release deal. The Secretary of State saying that would be a way to move things in a different direction as pressure grows politically within the president's own party. A new letter signed by nearly 90 House Democrats urges the administration to look into potentially restricting certain weapons transfers to Israel over concerns Prime Minister Netanyahu has restricted the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza in violation of federal law. Public sentiment is also weighing on the White House, faced with growing college demonstrations and youth leaders and Arab American and Muslim community members voicing deep frustration with the administration's handling of Israel and Gaza. Nationwide, a new poll shows nearly 4 in 10 Americans say the U.S. is doing too much to support Israel in its war with Hamas, up from about 30% in January. Now, next week, President Biden is scheduled to meet privately with the King of Jordan as Arab nations have pushed for a ceasefire. And on Tuesday, the White House says he will be speaking out against rising anti-Semitism at the Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington. Ed?
Natalie Brand at the White House, thanks. College graduation season's underway amid ongoing protests on several campuses. CBS's Amanda Starantino is in Los Angeles with word of new unrest today. Amanda, good evening.
Good evening, Ed. This is the time of the year when college students are typically celebrating, but frustration and even fear now mark the end of the school year.
Tensions escalating at the University of Virginia with state troopers in gas masks and riot gear making arrests. Protesters are removed as police dismantle the encampment by force. An emergency alert posted by security calls the protest unlawful. A campus crackdown also at University of Michigan with this overnight clash between police and demonstrators. Got heavy security in stadium aisles as well today for graduates at the university's commencement ceremony. Pro-Palestinian protesters paraded through the graduating class. Amid all this campus unrest,
we're still here, we're still fighting, and we're going to be fighting until our demands are met.
Graduation season is underway with ceremonies today at Indiana University and UConn. But for many grads, there may be no pomp and circumstance. Columbia University's May 15th celebration could be in jeopardy. That would be another sting for the graduates who already missed out on their 2020 high school celebrations because of the pandemic. Columbia President Manu Shafiq acknowledged the disappointment for these COVID generation students.
For those of you who are seniors, you're finishing college the way you started, online.
USC has canceled its traditional commencement ceremony. Instead, a Trojan family graduate celebration will take place Thursday at the historic LA Coliseum. But the class of 2024 will have to share that stadium space with previously booked events. Ed?
Amanda Starantino in Los Angeles, thanks. Now to Florida, where 2 teens caught on camera dumping buckets of trash into the ocean off Boca Raton have turned themselves in. Video of the trashing went viral this week. The 15 and 16-year-olds went to police Friday. They face third-degree felony charges. And at his annual meeting for shareholders, Warren Buffett, the so-called Oracle of Omaha and the founder of Berkshire Hathaway, laid out today what's supposed to happen once he's gone. Buffett said Greg Abel, who's been overseeing much of Berkshire Hathaway, will make investing decisions as the future CEO. Buffett turns 94 in August, but has signaled no plans to go yet. Berkshire Hathaway has about $189 billion in cash and an equity portfolio worth about $860 billion. And we learned today of the death of artist Frank Stella, his large-scale minimalist black paintings that took the art world by storm in the 1950s. Later, he created colorful works that seemed to repudiate his youth. Frank Stella died in New York City. He was 87. Still to come on the CBS Weekend News, we take you to a high school where all 130 seniors have been accepted by colleges. Caitlin Clark shows fans and fellow players she's ready for the big time. But first, a faded queen gets her crown back.
Queen Mary, Queen of the Seas, 80,000 tons, over 1,000 feet long. The most magnificent ship the world has ever seen.
That was March 1936 as the majestic Mary left Scotland, where she was built, steaming to Southampton for her maiden voyage. Cunard Line spared no expense constructing the luxury liner. She was in a class all her own. But 50 years later, she'd become just a tourist attraction in Long Beach, California. Decades of disinterest and not so benign neglect dimmed her majesty, and she became a royal burden. Now, as Tom Waite shows us, the Queen reigns again.
The Queen Mary approaches her final resting place at Long Beach.
To great fanfare, in 1967, the Queen Mary makes landfall for the last time in Long Beach, California. Today, the majestic ocean liner sits proudly at the port.
There's a soul here that other ships don't have, but the Queen Mary has it.
Commodore Everett Horn has been looking after the Queen for 43 years. If the ship has a soul, he is the heart.
She's the closest thing to a living being that I have ever commanded.
The Queen Mary is a floating museum.
The farewell party of the 1,200 passengers.
Once the playground for the rich and famous, transporting Hollywood royalty and actual royals, Winston Churchill also took trips aboard the ship, guided from this very bridge.
This is the automatic pilot right here.
But the Queen Mary's reign almost came to an end. After decades in port, the mighty ship fell into disrepair and was in danger of sinking.
The Queen Mary is a lucky ship. I believe the ship has a bit of a providential kiss upon her.
Perhaps that kiss kept the ship afloat. Like other iconic ships, the Queen Mary, with its opulent Art Deco interior, made the transition from a luxury liner to a critical military asset during World War II.
All 2,000 portholes and windows were quickly blacked out. All running lights were extinguished for the next 6 years.
In 1947, the Queen Mary resumed passenger voyages, but with air travel becoming popular, the ship would be retired. The city of Long Beach bought it in 1967 to be a waterfront tourist attraction.
Give the old Queen a tremendous welcome.
But decades later, the pandemic shut down the Queen Mary, and in 2021, the city of Long Beach took control again to save it.
And we evaluated the options to scrap the Queen Mary and the cost to fully restore it and the cost to protect it. And we ultimately made the decision as a city council to give the Queen Mary another shot.
A new partnership with Evolution Hospitality would revive the deteriorating ship and even turn a profit.
The ship does everything it can to create these fun and exciting things to do, and then once we make money, we put it right back into the ship.
The liner's grandeur is attracting new generations of fans.
I want the Queen Mary's legacy to be one of beauty, splendor,
terrorism.
So now it's up to the Queen's visitors to keep the legacy alive. As long as they keep coming, the Queen Mary will endure. Tom Waite, CBS News, Long Beach, California.
Still ahead on the CBS Weekend News, hooping it up. She was a star in the NCAA. Can she shine in the pros?
45 blocks last year, Clark for three.
From the University of Iowa to the School of Hard Knocks, basketball star Caitlin Clark last night made it look easy, showing she can compete in the big leagues in a preseason WNBA game. The newest player on the Indiana Fever drilled basket after basket before a sold-out crowd in Arlington, Texas, home of the Dallas Wings. She scored 21 points, but that wasn't enough to keep her team from falling to the Wings, 79-76. This is May 4th, the unofficial celebration of all things Star Wars.
I'm Skywalker, here to rescue you. It's a little short for a stormtrooper.
This clip from the film's 1977 trailer, the year it debuted in theaters. But what started out in a galaxy far, far away is now a worldwide phenomenon. People of all ages.
May the 4th be with you. Always.
Yes, even President Biden and actor Mark Hamill joining the fun. Hamill, who's now 72, also made a surprise appearance at the White House briefing on Friday. And even this reporter, from his head to his toes, is a big fan of Star Wars. You're never too short to be a stormtrooper. Next on the CBS Weekend News, the high school where every senior has been accepted into college. American high schools take pride in the percentage of their graduates who are accepted into college. In tonight's Weekend Journal, CBS's Noel Brennan takes us to a school in suburban Chicago that isn't satisfied with anything less than 100%.
Graduation day is weeks away.
Justin Anderson.
But this class of 2024,
Clinton Cherry,
deserves to be called out early.
Benjamin Hunt.
It's tradition at Southland College Prep Charter High School in Richton Park, Illinois.
I was like, oh my gosh.
And for seniors like London Williams.
We're almost there.
Before they accept diplomas, they celebrate acceptance.
Yes, I have been accepted to 43 different schools, and I applied to 51.
London may have the most to choose from, but every student can mark their college on a map. The entire graduating class accepted. At this point, it's practically expected.
Michael Childress, attending Stanford University.
This year makes 11 in a row for the graduating class at a predominantly African-American high school.
Every single class at Southland has been admitted to college. Can you give yourselves a round of applause for that?
A streak of excellence, unbroken by a pandemic.
But it was a difficult 2 years.
Instead, seniors are on track to set records.
And the amount of money rises each year.
The class has amassed $50 million and counting in scholarships.
London Williams, attending Quincy University.
Congratulations.
The class of 2024, he was all in. Make some noise for that.
The future is bright for these seniors. And a class that's all in deserves all out celebration. Noel Brennan, CBS News, Richton Park, Illinois.
Good way to end things tonight. That's the CBS Weekend News for this Saturday. First thing tomorrow, CBS Sunday morning. Then it's Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan's guests include South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, who's releasing a controversial new memoir. I'm Ed O'Keefe in Washington. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Australian police have shot dead a 16-year-old boy after he stabbed a man in Perth. Authorities say there are indications the teen had been radicalized online. Police said they received a call from a male late last night, warning that he was going to commit acts of violence, but he did not give his name or location. And within minutes, another emergency call alerted police that a male with a knife was running around a car park in a southern suburb of Perth. Local media say witnesses described the boy wielding a knife, chasing people on the street. The teenager rushed at police and was fatally shot by an officer. Police add that the attacker acted alone, and they add that the incident had hallmarks of terrorism but was yet to be declared a terrorist act. An investigation is currently underway. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says he was briefed on the incident by intelligence agencies, which advised there was no ongoing threat. He adds that Australia is a peace-loving nation and there is no place for violent extremism. The latest knife attack comes after New South Wales police charged several boys last month with terrorism-related offences in investigations. It follows the stabbing of a bishop at a church. And that attack on the bishop came only days after a deadly mass stabbing in a Sydney mall that claimed the lives of 6 people. Israel and Hamas have downplayed hopes of an end to their mere 7-month war as ceasefire talks in Cairo ended for the day with no agreement. A new round of discussions will begin tomorrow. Mediators from Qatar, Egypt and the United States earlier sat down with the Hamas delegation. Israel says it will only send over its team once it sees positive movement on a framework. It said tough negotiations for an actual deal remain. Months of talks have largely stalled due to Hamas's demand for a lasting ceasefire and Israel's vow to continue fighting until Hamas is destroyed. Now, another issue between the warring sides is whether or not the ceasefire is temporary or permanent. A senior Hamas official says the group would not accept a truce that did not completely end the Gaza war, while also accusing Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu of personally hindering a deal. The current proposed deal that Egyptian mediators put to Hamas sets out a 3-stage process to end the war. Well, the first is a pause in hostilities for up to 40 days. The second would see Israel and Hamas finalize arrangements for a permanent ceasefire. and the release of all remaining captives. The third and final phase would see the start of a Gaza reconstruction plan. And so far, ceasefire talks have continued for months without a breakthrough, but the leaked proposal hints at compromises after months of stalemate. The trouble for Israel and Hamas is that both sides want to end the war on their own terms. Hamas leaders have for months refused anything short of a permanent end to the fighting. Israel, on the other hand, wants to see all remaining hostages home safe, with Hamas crushed on the battlefield and expelled from power in Gaza. Well, thousands of people have taken to the streets in Israel to protest. They are demanding the government to reach a deal to bring the hostages back and for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to step down. The Israeli government estimates that some 130 hostages remain in Gaza. The army says 35 of them are dead. Family members of those held captive say anything possible have to be done to bring them home.
We need to bring all the hostages back, the alive ones, the dead ones. We got to bring them back. We got to switch this government. This has got to end.
The nation, the people, we just don't want this government anymore.
We hope the world hears us and knows that the people of Israel are not the government of Israel. We don't agree with the policy, we don't agree with the way they behave, and we want to have a different future.
And amid pressure on the Netanyahu government, the chief of the United Nations Food Programme has warned of a full-blown famine in northern Gaza. Cindy McCain, executive director of the World Food Programme, added that the situation is rapidly spreading to the south. Ms. McCain is the second high-profile American leading a U.S. government or UN aid effort who has said there is famine in northern Gaza. Her remarks, though, do not constitute an official declaration, which is a complex bureaucratic process. But the World Food Programme is urging for a ceasefire and safe access into Gaza. Israel has faced increasing pressure in recent weeks to allow more aid into Gaza after its military killed 7 international aid workers from World Central Kitchen in an airstrike. The besieged Palestinian territory is home to 2.4 million people. The World Health Organization has said that the availability of food in the Gaza Strip has very slightly improved, though the risk of famine continues. Now, Israel has repeatedly accused the United Nations and non-governmental organizations of not distributing aid quickly enough, but the aid agencies blame the trickle of essential food into the Palestinian enclave on restrictions and inspections imposed by Israel.
انا عندي 13 نفر الاسره ما عدا اولادي واولاد كان عايشه بدنا ايش جميع يقبض بعدين الكاميرات شحت علينا شحت كثير الكاميرات في الاول بقى في كاميرات اليوم مش كاميرات اليوم الخضره شهر ونص مش الخضره.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to arrive in France later today for a rare visit, and this is his first European visit in 5 years. He will be meeting his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron, who's expected to press Mr. Xi on trade. And Mr. Xi will be in France for 2 days. His official meetings will include joint talks with Mr. Macron and European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen. France will seek to make progress on opening the Chinese market to its agricultural exports. Well, his visit comes at a time of growing trade tensions between Europe and China. Well, this year marks 60 years of Chinese-French relations. France sees Mr. Xi's visit as an important diplomatic moment and wants to focus on Beijing's broader relations with the EU. France is also keen to nudge China into pressuring Russia to halt the war in Ukraine. And on Tuesday, Mr. Xi will head to Serbia and Hungary, countries with warm ties with Russia. The Chinese leader is hoping to enhance bilateral relations with the 3 European countries and boost mutually beneficial cooperation. Coming up on Asian, our fears are growing that Asian hate could get worse with Donald Trump's return to office.
Every 2 Asian Americans living in New York City experienced hate crime because of their race or ethnicity in 2023.
And later, close to 60 people dead and 70,000 others forced from their homes as floods rage in southern Brazil.
It's indulgent, and it could also be healthy, all because of this star ingredient.
There's benefits in cocoa, lowering blood pressure, reducing inflammation.
But is there a dark side to chocolate?
I read all dark chocolate have some heavy metals in them.
Is chocolate really good for you?
Join William Hildebrandt on Paris Direct. Don't miss out on this comprehensive lunchtime news roundup.
You can watch Paris Direct every weekend here on France 24.
Hello and welcome to Daybreak on France 24. We'll be with you until 10 a.m. Paris time. These are this morning's main headlines. Negotiations are to resume this Sunday amid hopes that progress can be made towards agreeing in Gaza. A senior Hamas official is insisting the militant group will not agree to a truce that doesn't explicitly include a complete end to the war. Death toll rises to at least 57 following raging floods and mudslides in southern Brazil. Nearly 70,000 people have been forced to flee their homes. And overshadowed by the war in Gaza, organisers of this year's Eurovision prepare for potential protests against Israel's participation in the contest, which kicks off in the Swedish city of Malmö next Tuesday. Good to have you with us. Well, first this out, Cairo, where Hamas delegation is set to resume talks with mediators from Qatar, Egypt and the United States on a proposal to halt the fighting in Gaza. A senior official from reiterated demands that any deal should include an Israeli withdrawal and an end to the war, conditions that Israel has previously rejected. It has yet to send a delegation to the talks. With the latest, here's Peter O'Brien.
Israel still has its sights on Rafah, and we're no closer to a ceasefire. Hamas has poured cold water on the optimism surrounding the latest round of talks in Cairo between their delegation and Qatari, Egyptian and American mediators. The AFP quoted a senior Hamas official as saying there will be no agreement without a complete cessation of the war, and accusing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of personally hindering the deal. The proposal on the table would halt fighting for 40 days and exchange hostages for Palestinian prisoners, according to details released by the UK. Negotiations are set to continue on Sunday, but Israel has yet to send a delegation to the Egyptian capital. Late on Friday, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said accepting a ceasefire deal should be a, quote, no-brainer for Hamas.
And the reality in this moment is the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas.
Protesters kept up the pressure on Netanyahu on Saturday, turning out in their thousands again in Tel Aviv to demand the government accept a ceasefire deal and secure the release of the remaining hostages. Netanyahu's vowed not to stop the war until Hamas is destroyed and faces pressure from nationalists in his coalition to go ahead with the offensive against the southern Gaza city of Rafah.
Well, as you've been hearing, Hamas is accusing the Israeli Prime Minister of personally hindering an agreement. Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing to press on with a ground assault on the southern Gazan city of Rafah, regardless of the outcome of the talks. With more, here's our Jerusalem correspondent, Iris Mackler.
From all the Israeli officials that I've been speaking to, they do feel that if there isn't a hostage deal, then there will be a Rafah operation. However, two things are important to say. That's not a move that is supported across the Israeli military. They say there would be no point going into Rafah, repeating what was done, let's say, in Khan Yunis, and then departing and leaving a political vacuum again. There has to be a plan for the day after Rafah. Otherwise, the whole thing is, there would, in Israeli terms, be a success of destroying some further Hamas battalions. But if you then leave, what's the point? Say, these particular Israeli military analysts. So there's that argument. There's the other argument that there's no point in going to Rafah. What Israel really needs is the Rafah border, the border between Egypt and Gaza, the Philadelphia corridor as it's known. That's where Israel should place itself. So there's all these arguments about whether a ground operation in Rafah now would actually achieve the military aims and the war aims that Israel had set itself, even as there is, we must acknowledge this now, Gavin, much less fighting going on. We are reporting this war as if it's still going on in the terms and at the heat and intensity that it was in January, and it's definitely not.
Iris Mackler, who spoke with us yesterday. A volunteer with Doctors Without Borders. He's worked in not only Gaza but in conflict zones in Iraq, Syria and Yemen. A well-known British-Palestinian surgeon is on his way back to London after being denied entry to France to speak at a Senate meeting about the war. An official says Hassan Abu Sita was turned away because he's barred from entering the Schengen zone following a request from Germany. Nick Rushworth has more.
The British-Palestinian surgeon Hassan Abu Sita worked in hospitals in Gaza for several weeks last October and November. He says he witnessed atrocities perpetrated by the Israeli army. He was due to speak at a conference in Paris organised by the French Senate. However, he never got there because he was denied entry. On social media, he said, "I am at Charles de Gaulle Airport. They are preventing me from entering France. I'm supposed to speak at the French Senate today. They say the Germans put a one-year ban on my entry to Europe." The surgeon was denied entry to Germany last month. He was due to take part in a pro-Palestinian conference in Berlin, which was shut down by police. Abu Sita told France 24 he was not aware the German ban applied to the Schengen area of European countries.
It seems that the German authorities do not want me not only to speak to German citizens, but do not want me to speak to anybody in Europe. And my feeling is they do not certainly want me to speak to the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
Speaking to Le Monde, he said, "It's the criminalisation of the victims, the gang complicit in genocide trying to silence the witness."
What we witnessing...
Abu Sita was able to talk to the French Senate via video link to give his report on the medical situation in Gaza. Much of his time there was at the territory's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, which the WHO says has been reduced to ashes by Israel's siege. Israel denies that it has committed war crimes in Gaza, saying it is acting in self-defense following the attack on the 7th of October by Hamas.
In other world news, Togo's electoral commission says the country's ruling party has won a parliamentary majority following last month's legislative elections. The ballot was held in the wake of a divisive constitutional reform that critics said allowed the president, already in power for nearly 2 decades, to extend his family's political dynasty and to evade term limits. He'll now be able to take on a new role similar to Prime Minister that's automatically assumed by the leader of the parliamentary majority. Opposition parties had denounced the constitutional reform as an institutional coup. Next to southern Brazil, where fast-rising water levels are straining dams and threatening the economically important city of Porto Alegre, home to 1.4 million residents. Authorities in the state of Rio Grande do Sul say at least 57 people are now known to have died following catastrophic flooding and mudslides. In addition to the nearly 70,000 residents forced from their homes, more than 1 million people lack access to drinking water. Sophie Lamont has the story.
Roads washed away, bridges collapsed, and streets engulfed in water. These are the worst floods ever recorded in Brazil's southern province of Rio Grande do Sul. In the small town, entire homes were gutted out.
I need a lot of help. We have nowhere to sleep and nothing to eat. We have nothing.
Triggered by torrential rains in the south of the country, the floods have killed dozens of people, left many more missing, and displaced over 70,000.
My father-in-law is still missing, and there are other people we know who have not yet been rescued.
I almost drowned. The guy who saw me pulled me into the boat because I couldn't resist the current.
Brazil's federal government has sent aircrafts, boats, and more than 600 soldiers to boost rescue efforts and deliver much-needed aid. So far, roughly a third of displaced people have been brought to shelters set up in public facilities.
We demolished the canteen and the community hall to make housing. This house was transformed to meet the needs of those displaced by flooding, and we did it all in about 3 hours.
Located between polar and tropical atmospheres, the state experiences extreme weather events, made more intense due to climate change and the El Niño phenomenon. 5 days in, the rainfall shows no sign of respite.
Glitter, rhinestones and potentially pro-Palestinian protests. Organisers of this year's Eurovision are preparing for demonstrations against Israel's participation in the song contest, which will begin in the Swedish city of Malmö on Tuesday, overshadowed by the war in Gaza.
United by music. This year's Eurovision slogan couldn't be further from the truth. The annual feel-good celebration is shrouded by controversy over Israel's participation amid the war in Gaza. Direct threats have been made against the singer representing Israel, and thousands are expected to gather in protest when the event starts.
We count on 20 to 40,000 demonstrators coming to Malmö, coming from all over Europe. It will be a very big protest.
100,000 visitors are expected in Sweden's southwest coast city of Malmö for the event, where the police authorized a Quran burning demonstration on Friday. In this tense context, security is a top priority.
There are a lot of police on the ground throughout Malmö. We receive reinforcements from all over Sweden, but also from Denmark and Norway. We also use drones so that we have a good overview of the event.
Another major world conflict is expected to be at the heart of the event. Ukrainian group Aliona and Jerry Hill will be defending the blue and yellow flag. They hope to repeat last year's performance and bring home the trophy.
If you talk a lot about your situation, people hear you. So now I feel that people heard us still now. And
we're here to talk.
Yeah.
If they win, the duo say they plan to sell their trophy and donate the proceeds to the war effort, like their predecessors who raised 900,000 euros in an auction on Facebook.
For those of you just joining us here on France 24, let's take another look at our top stories this hour. Negotiations are set to resume this Sunday amid hopes that progress can be made towards agreeing a ceasefire in Gaza. A senior Hamas official is insisting the militant group will not agree to a truce that doesn't explicitly include a complete end to the war. Left rises to at least 57 following raging flooding and mudslides in southern Brazil. Nearly 70,000 people have been forced to flee their homes. And overshadowed by the war in Gaza, organisers of this year's Eurovision prepare for potential protests against Israel's participation in the contest, which kicks off in the Swedish city of Malmö next Tuesday. It's time now for our focus report, and with inflation continuing to hit hard, shoppers here in France and elsewhere are increasingly turning to vintage stores and websites in a bid to save money, reduce their carbon footprint and support local businesses. The trend to buy second-hand clothing is also being fuelled by the rise in fast fashion, as Shona Bhattacharya now reports.
This Paris thrift store opened less than a year ago, a new concept for the student.
This is my second time. I had no idea these places existed before.
These days, almost half of French buyers go to second-hand outlets first, mostly for the low prices.
I found a jean dress for €3, a top for another $3. I could never get them that cheap and new.
In France, the thrifted clothing market grew 140% in 2 years. Globally, it now stands at some 34 billion euros, an inexpensive alternative to a climate culprit that's especially popular among young people. Long gone are the days when thrifting meant sifting through heaps or bins.
Here are the sweatshirts with t-shirts and sweatpants further down.
So everything's highly organized?
Well organized? Well, we do our best. But yes, it's easy to look through like a traditional store. You shouldn't be able to tell that you're in a thrift shop.
Almost all of the second-hand clothing you can buy in France passes through this depot. Every week, 40 metric tons of apparel are delivered here. Hervé Chardel is looking for steals for his soon-to-open store in La Rochelle, in the west of France.
These bundles were sorted around the world. This one must come from Japan. Clothes are made everywhere. You can't just have them shipped from Britain in France. It's a global business.
A global business with far-reaching consequences. Some of the biggest open-air second-hand clothing markets are in Africa, like this one in Senegal. With the rise of fast fashion over the last 30 years, the quality of clothing has gone down, and up to 40% of what ends up here is deemed useless and incinerated. Oversupply is also stifling local textile industries. Transportation costs are another problem, as are high labor costs to recondition clothing before resale. Put together, these considerations mean the second-hand apparel industry loses money despite its colossal size. Even online global industry leader Vinted has posted a net loss every year since 2017. The only subgroup showing profits is the luxury resale sector. In this Parisian store, pre-loved designer clothes are sold 25 to 95 euros a pop.
At least I can get a good deal here. On 1 or 2 pieces I'd never buy in a normal store. I think it's a good thing.
I bought an article worth €4,000, but I could never have afforded that.
How much was it?
95.
This former English teacher goes to yard sales and second-hand markets and makes a curated selection.
Luxury is often highly unaffordable, and I wanted to undercut the market. People want a wider range of second-hand goods. They want luxury for a fraction of the price.
There's no stopping the trend that professionals say.
More people displaced in Sudan as fighting in North Darfur's capital El Fasher intensifies, and a stark warning from the United Nations that time is running out to prevent famine as bureaucratic hurdles and ongoing clashes impact food delivery.
Our calls for humanitarian access to conflict hotspots in Sudan have never been more critical. WFP urgently requires unrestricted access and security guarantees to deliver assistance to the families struggling for survival amid devastating levels of violence. And we must be able to use the Adre border crossing and move assistance across front lines from Port Sudan in the east into Darfur so we can reach people in this desperate region.
The WFP says close to 2 million people in Darfur are experiencing emergency levels of hunger, and access constraints are hampering efforts to bring food into the region ahead of the rainy season, when many roads become impassable. With just over a day to go to Chad's presidential elections, voters are eager to do battle with the old regime. Indeed, the country has not held a presidential poll since the death of former leader Idriss Déby Itno, who ruled the country for 3 decades. We've come a long way. We are already ready and well prepared, so even if we have to go out and vote today, we're ready for it.
Malheureusement, l'Ange,
The National Election Management Authority, ANCHE, has banned anyone from filming or taking photos of the results, or from publishing them on social media or any other radio or television platform.
les télévisions.
Not true, say residents of the capital in N'Djamena. They say the law does not prohibit them from photographing the results, and some accuse ANCHE of preparing to commit election fraud in favour of the interim president, Mohamed Idriss Déby, who's candidate of the former MPS party. It's not true that ANCHE is setting up to rig the elections in favour of the MPS, but I affirm and reaffirm that we will film the results, and they can send us where they want, we'll wait for them and see how they react. In the past, people were there to rig things, so for us the president is asking us to be guardians of this vote. So to prevent people from hijacking our votes, we will be obliged to film.
Pendant ce temps,
Meanwhile, the country is holding its breath, and in every corner of the capital, people are preparing for the final campaign rallies, which are shaping up to be very hot indeed.
l'ouverture de cette campagne pour Africa News Télévision, je le me réclame.
Des officiers de l'armée nigériane sont mis en cause dans une frappe de drone effectuée par erreur et qui a tué 85 civils dans le village de Tudunbiri, au nord-ouest de l'état de Kaduna, en décembre. Les forces de défense nigérianes auraient pris ces civils pour des éléments d'une milice, selon une déclaration faite jeudi par la hiérarchie militaire du pays. L'armée a déjà reconnu que le drone avait accidentellement frappé le village, tuant des habitants qui célébraient une fête musulmane dans l'une des pires erreurs de frappe aérienne du pays. Le directeur des opérations médiatiques de la défense, le général de division Edouard Bouba, a indiqué que les enquêtes étaient closes, avec l'engagement de traduire les coupables devant la cour martiale et de rendre justice aux victimes. Le général n'a pas donné plus de détails sur l'affaire.
Today, a teenager killed by police after he stabbed a man in a suburb in Perth South.
There are indications he had been radicalised online, and I want to reassure the community at this stage it appears that he acted solely and alone.
Bodies found in Mexico likely to belong to 2 missing Australians and an American. Speculation grows of a ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel as negotiations continue in Cairo. And $3 billion in student loans to be wiped out in the upcoming budget to alleviate cost of living pressures.
We're going to backdate this to last year. In other words, we're going to wipe out what happened last year and make sure that it never happened again.
Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ruby Cornish. A major police investigation is underway in Perth South after police shot dead a teenager who stabbed a member of the public. Authorities say the 16-year-old was known to police and was part of a program designed to help individuals at risk of being radicalised. Reporter Tabarak Al-Jaroud has the details in Perth.
Police say they received a call just after 10 o'clock last night from a male who said that he had intended to commit acts of violence. He didn't say where he was going or what violence he would be committing. However, police then received a call just minutes later from a member of the community who was here at Willerton who said that there was a male running around the car park with a knife. Police had also received calls from concerned members of the Muslim community who had phoned in to alert them prior to the incident. Police responded immediately and arrived at the scene where they were confronted with a 16-year-old Caucasian male who was wielding a kitchen knife approximately 30 centimetres long. 2 of the officers drew their tasers while the third drew a firearm. Police Commissioner Cole Blanche says he watched the body cam footage which showed that the boy had rushed at 2 of the officers who deployed their tasers unsuccessfully. The boy then advanced at the third officer who fired a single shot, fatally wounding the 16-year-old boy. Another member of the community was found at the scene with stab wounds. Police say the middle-aged man had received stab wounds to the back. He was taken to hospital where he is currently in a stable condition. Police say the 16-year-old boy had complex mental health issues and online radicalisation issues as well. He was part of the Countering Violent Extremism program for a couple of years. However, Police Commissioner Cole Blanche says they still don't know what triggered the incident last night, but he has described it as a very tragic event and a tragic outcome.
Again, I don't want to say he has been radicalised or is radicalised because I think that forms part of the investigation. However, here we are, a tragic event where a 16-year-old has died as a result of being in a car park at 10 o'clock at night with a knife. I think that is a very sad and tragic outcome.
Police Commissioner Cole Blanche says despite the incident having the hallmarks of being a terrorist attack, he is not declaring that at this stage due to the timing. He says more information is needed to understand the motivations behind the incident. As I mentioned earlier, police still don't know what triggered the incident last night. However, police are working with the 16-year-old boy's family, who they say are cooperating with them. And the Police Commissioner Cole Blanche says that the boy did act alone and that he's describing it as a very rare attack. Obviously, with the heightened tensions across the country due to recent stabbings, he wants to assure the community that WA is safe and that an investigation is underway to understand more about this incident. An independent investigation is also going to be undertaken due to the police shooting that occurred here last night. Premier Roger Cook also said that he'll be calling a meeting with the multi-faith communities, and he has also thanked the Muslim community for having the courage to reach out and raise their concerns.
Tabarak Al-Jaroud reporting there. Authorities in Mexico are yet to formally identify bodies found on a remote stretch of the Baja California coast, but they say there's strong evidence linking them to the disappearance of 2 missing Australian brothers, Jake and Callum Robinson, and their American friend Jack Carter Road. North America correspondent Carrington Clark reports from Baja California.
I'm here outside the forensics office in Ensenada, where the 4 bodies that were discovered in this well in remote Baja California have now been taken for further investigation. Although they have not been formally identified, authorities say they are confident that 3 of the bodies belong to the 2 Australian brothers and their American travel companion. Now, their campsite was about 2 kilometres away from where this well containing these bodies was situated. That particular campsite was destroyed by fire, and authorities say that it also contained human remains, which are also currently being tested. There is greater mystery about this 4th body, but based on the level of decomposition, authorities do believe that it had been longer in the well than the other 3 bodies, and they're at this point unsure how closely it is connected. In terms of who they think is responsible, 1 man has been so far charged with a crime called forced disappearance in relation to the 2 Australian brothers and their American friend. 2 other people who we believe are connected to that person who has been charged have been detained in relation to both a cell phone that authorities say belonged to one of the 3 and because of drugs. At this point, though, they have not been charged with that same crime of forced disappearance. The authorities say they are working both with their American and Australian partners in terms of this investigation, and we do believe the parents of the Robinson brothers are on their way to Mexico.
That was Carrington Clark in Baja California. There's speculation Hamas and Israel are close to reaching a deal on a ceasefire in Gaza, but the Israeli government has expressed some reservations about the agreement. Middle East correspondent Eric Torchek reports.
There are a number of reports, notably one in a Saudi newspaper, that Hamas has agreed to a ceasefire. That would be a 40-day pause in the fighting, and Hamas would release 33 Israeli hostages, namely those who are female, elderly and vulnerable, in exchange for Israel releasing a number of Palestinian prisoners. There are also reports that the United States has assured Hamas that there will be subsequent phases to a ceasefire, which would see a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in exchange for the release of the remaining hostages and other Palestinian prisoners held inside Israel. But figures inside the Israeli government have already quashed that speculation, saying Israel has not agreed to a permanent end to the fighting, and it is still Israel's intention to invade the southern border city of Rafah, regardless of any ceasefire deal. Israel says there are 4 Hamas battalions in that city. That's despite intense domestic pressure here in Israel for a ceasefire deal, particularly from the families of those held hostage by Hamas. Tonight, they warned that they feared Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to, quote, torpedo the ceasefire deal and urged the government to make an agreement. And there are also ministers, though, inside Benjamin Netanyahu's government that don't want to see a ceasefire deal. This type of speculation, we have heard it before. The main sticking point has always been whether the ceasefire will lead to a permanent end to the fighting or not. Hamas wants it to, Israel does not. But this is probably the most intense it's been in some time, and it's possible that this is the closest the 2 sides have been to reaching an agreement. And that means there's growing hope inside Gaza that there could be an end to the Israeli bombardment and occupation, and amongst those families here in Israel that they might soon see their loved ones again.
Eric Torchek there. The New South Wales opposition is pushing to amend the state's bail laws to make it harder for alleged domestic violence offenders to be released. Among the proposed changes is the expanded use of electronic monitoring for alleged domestic violence offenders. The legislation also proposes that magistrates are required to hear bail applications in cases involving personal violence. The opposition says they're willing to cooperate with Labor to get the changes through.
This is about saving lives. This is about protecting women and children. This is about a common sense approach. We want to be collaborative, we want to be constructive, we want to work with the government, we want to work with the crossbench.
And we're calling on the government to invest in electronic monitoring immediately so that those people can be kept safe in our regions, in our cities, wherever they may be, so that they can have that space to get on with their lives and recover.
Police are investigating the alleged torture and murder of a 23-year-old man at a remote property north of Brisbane. 2 people in their 20s have been charged. Reporter Sarah Richards has the details.
2 people who allegedly tortured a man north of Brisbane have had their charges upgraded to murder after the victim died in hospital. The 23-year-old Brisbane man was found critically wounded at a property on Mount Mee on Wednesday. Police allege he sustained multiple injuries over a prolonged period of time. He since died in hospital. A 21-year-old woman and a 23-year-old man were arrested and charged with attempted murder. Police have now upgraded that charge to murder. Initial inquiries have indicated there was an association between them and the victim. The pair is facing several offences, including torture, deprivation of liberty and assault. They remain in custody and are expected to reappear at the Caboolture Magistrates Court.
The investigation as it stands at this point is that we'll always seek any information from the public that they have to offer in order to gain a greater understanding of the history and the circumstances that ultimately led to this event.
Homicide detectives are searching for 2 men after a violent incident at a house in Melbourne southeast which left 1 man dead. Investigators believe the people involved were known to each other. Reporter Cyan Valance has the details from Melbourne.
Violence broke out here just after midnight with tragic consequences. 1 man has died, 1 other was rushed to hospital, and 2 more fled after the incident here in Ormond, southeast of Melbourne. The alarm was raised around 1 a.m. Emergency services rushed here to the home on North Road. Police say 2 men fled, while paramedics took 2 others to Alfred Hospital, but 1 couldn't be saved. This morning, homicide detectives and forensics are combing the home for clues. Police say the men are known to each other. There is blood on the street outside the house, along with pieces of luggage thrown across the driveway. It's a confronting sight for residents. Some told us this is the latest in a string of violent incidents in the area, and they don't feel safe here anymore. Other neighbours say there are often parties being held at the home.
This is actually one of the safest municipalities in Melbourne, where so if it's happening here, and it's the public safety, then what's it like? So we actually specifically came to this area because it was a safe area. But they sort of said, oh, well, don't worry, it's just kids attacking other kids. But like, I've got kids, and I think people don't underestimate the trauma that anyone who is a victim of this crime is going to suffer for the rest of their life. The fact that you cannot walk in your neighbourhood safely. I mean, that's terrible.
Police are now hunting for dash cam and security vision. They're asking for anyone with information to call Crime Stoppers.
Cyan Balance reporting there. A manhunt is continuing in Perth after a violent home invasion in the city's southeast. Emergency services were called to a home in Thornley yesterday morning after a man in his 40s and a woman in her 50s were assaulted. The offenders forced their way into the home and stabbed the man in the neck, knocking him out of his wheelchair. The woman suffered a fractured arm in the tussle with the intruders. Detectives are investigating whether the burglary was part of an arranged sale of goods over social media.
WA Police consider all home burglaries to be serious, but when we see such an escalation of violence happen to two vulnerable victims, that is of extreme concern to us. So Armidale detectives have now taken the lead, and we're throwing all our resources at trying to identify the female and the two male offenders involved in this matter.
And just to note that stabbing incident is separate to the stabbing incident in Perth overnight in which a 16-year-old was shot dead by police. In other news, millions of Australians with student loans will have hundreds of dollars wiped from their HECS debts as part of the federal government's cost of living relief in the upcoming budget. The move is part of indexation changes which are being backdated to counter last year's record rise. Here's National Education reporter Connor Duffy.
Across Australia, almost 3 million people owe $78 billion in student loans, and as cost of living pressures have continued to hit hard, calls for HECS debt relief have grown louder and louder. Every year, HECS debts rise with inflation in a process known as indexation. Last year's mammoth slug of 7.1% was the second highest on record. It's left people like teacher Georgina Routley so frustrated by their rising debts that they're reconsidering the value of university.
I know for my teenage children who are starting to think about what careers they might have, university isn't necessarily an option they're considering because they are aware of the debts that they will incur, and it is a disincentive from going down that path.
Now the Education Minister Jason Clare and the government are promising large indexation rises will never happen again. It's accepting a recommendation from a recent wide-ranging review of universities to make HECS simpler and fairer. Indexation will now be calculated on either the Consumer Price Index or the Wage Price Index, whichever is lower, and it'll be backdated to last year to cancel some of the pain from that big rise.
Will mean that their HECS debt is cut. If you've got a HECS debt of, say, $26,000, which is the average across Australia, it means that your HECS debt will be cut by about $1,200. Right across the country, it means that we're wiping about $3 billion of HECS debt for more than 3 million Australians.
Why have you decided to act now?
Well, I think the hike in HECS debt last year hit a lot of Aussies hard, particularly a lot of young Australians, and they've made their voice heard. I heard it, the government heard it, we've listened and we're responding, and that's why we've acted to not just change this, but to backdate it, and make sure that we wipe out what happened last year and put in law the things that we need to put in law to make sure that it never happens again.
And the court also recommended changes to the way banks consider people's HECS debts and to the timing of indexation. Have you taken a position on those recommendations?
We've written to the banks, we've written to the ABA asking them for advice on that. It's one, as you say, of a bunch of recommendations in the Accord, about 47 recommendations all up. It's a big report, and it sets out a plan for how we reform higher education for the next decade and beyond. It's bigger than one budget, but we've got to start the work right now, and you'll see the first stage of our response to the Accord in the budget on Budget Night.
The government's HECS changes will require legislation to become law.
Russia has opened a criminal case against Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, putting him on a wanted list. But Moscow has not provided any details of the charges. In response, Ukraine's foreign ministry pointed out the International Criminal Court has already issued an arrest warrant for the Russian President Vladimir Putin for war crimes. Russia has included a number of Ukrainian and European politicians on a wanted list since the start of the war with Ukraine. Well, heavy rains are causing widespread flooding in a number of countries around the world. Floods in Kenya have killed more than 200 people, and authorities have ordered civilians to evacuate areas surrounding 180 dams which are likely to spill over. In Brazil, more than 50 people have been killed, entire neighbourhoods have been submerged, and more than 500,000 people are without power or clean water. Officials in Indonesia say 14 people have been killed in flooding and landslides in the South Sulawesi region. Well, living in smog-filled cities can feel stifling, but there's a place in Australia where the air is so clean it's considered among the purest in the world. On the far northwestern tip of Tasmania sits Kenilworth Cape Grim. Winds blowing in from the wild southwest bring air that's free from pollution. Scientists use the site to monitor the planet's baseline atmosphere, and are now embarking on a new project to unlock a mystery in the Southern Ocean which could help us understand the impacts of climate change. Reporter Jono Gibson has more.
It's a place that feels like the edge of the world, where a wild and rugged coastline is frequently lashed by winds, carrying some of the purest air on the planet.
The air, I don't know if it's just me, but it's so crisp and clean. You feel like you can breathe it properly. It's magnificent.
While locals love the northwest tip of Tasmania, scientists are also making the most of its unique location.
When the wind blows in from the sea, it's travelled across the Southern Ocean from as far away as Antarctica, meaning it's avoided the contaminants like dust from land masses and the dirty pollution of cities.
The air here under baseline conditions is very, very clean. So it's 1,000 times cleaner in terms of the number of particles than you would measure in Melbourne, for example. And that's Melbourne on a good day.
The Kenilworth Cape Grim Air Monitoring Station was set up almost 50 years ago. Its measurements are considered to be an accurate baseline of the global atmosphere because it's free from that local contamination.
In a nutshell, we measure our greenhouse gases and ozone-depleting substances. We also measure the aerosols and reactive gases.
Through a series of instruments, air gets channeled into a laboratory where high-tech gadgets analyse the physical and chemical properties of the incoming flow. 6 times a year, liquid nitrogen is used to chill high-pressure tanks, suck in thousands of litres of baseline air, adding to an archive that now dates back almost 5 decades.
And what it's enabled us to do is, by filling multiple cylinders per year over many years, that we can go back and actually analyse old air when we get new instrumental techniques.
The Air Archive reflects the human impact on the planet's rapidly changing atmosphere, which has seen a 25% rise in carbon dioxide since the first tank was filled in the late 1970s. But while scientists have a clear picture of the past, the computations used to forecast future changes are lacking critical data.
Almost all of that uncertainty in climate models has to do with our lack of ability to represent clouds very, very well.
Australian and US researchers have now teamed up here at Kenilworth Cape Grim as part of an international mission designed to unravel some of the mysteries of clouds in the Southern Ocean.
When clouds form in freezing conditions, tiny particles like dust and pollution can trigger ice crystals to develop. But because the air is cleaner in the Southern Ocean, the water droplets remain in a supercool liquid state. These liquid clouds reflect more sunlight back into space, which means less heat is absorbed by the ocean. This phenomenon isn't accurately accounted for in current climate models.
So we have a lot of instruments, radars and lidars and cameras that are constantly scanning these clouds to tell us what kind they are, how high they are, what they're made of, do they have ice, are they supercooled liquid.
The Cloud project is set to run for the next 18 months, providing critical information that scientists hope can better prepare us for the changing climate. Jonah Gibson, ABC News, Kenilworth, Cape Grim.
Time for sports now with Daniela Intilli.
Melbourne has ended Geelong.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.